Happy Thursday. I'm Pia from Stitches and Scraps, and this is Lunchtime Live, episode 115. For those of you who are new here, Lunchtime Live is my video newsletter for Stitches and Scraps. So I will start out by telling you what I'm working on at Stitches and Scraps and what's coming up in the next week or so. And then we'll end with a demo. Now for 2022, I have been doing a stitch of the week, alternating between knit and crochet stitches. This is a knit week, and our stitch is the knit fisherman's rib. So I know on camera, this just looks like a normal ribbing, but I'll show you up close. It's actually much more dense with every stitch being wrapped. So like every stitch is basically worked twice. And it's super easy. It builds off of what we learned 2 weeks ago, which was the knit bee stitch. So we'll get to that at the end of the session. Meanwhile, if I'm telling you about stuff like when I tell you I've got a tutorial for this cast on and stuff like that, if you want to see the links to those items, go in the description on this video and you'll see a blog post, a link to a blog post. In that post, I've listed everything that I plan to talk about with all the links to it. So you can easily find, that tutorial I mentioned or that pattern I mentioned right there in that post. Good morning, Mary. It's good to see you. Yes, happy Thursday. I don't know what's happy about Thursday, but I've always said happy Thursday. I think it's just happy because I get to see you all. Anyway, so I think that is all for intro. So let me jump right into what's new this week. The exciting thing that's new this week is the very last pattern in the Bag-Along Cal. So I've shown you guys this before. Good morning, Helene. How are you? This is a coin purse built, attached to this metal purse frame. So it's nice and roomy in there, and I still haven't woven in the ends. But this coin purse is it's the last bag in the year-long Bag-Along Cal we've been doing. So this one will close out the year for us. And it's done in split single crochet stitches with embroidery on top. So this one's going to have 3 tutorials to go with it that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. The first one will come out next week, and that is for the split single crochet stitches that make up the bag. The rest of the tutorials for that are going to be one for the embroidery and one for attaching the frame. They're going to be shorter tutorials, but there's 3 instead of 2. So that's basically the rest of the Bag-Along Cal. I mean, that's it. It's over. I can't believe we're so close to the end of the year already. Somebody said the other day there's only 6 weeks left in 2022, and I'm like, really? Oh my God. But anyway, along with that bag, just like all the other bags, there is a giveaway of awesome prizes from We Crochet. So be sure to check out the giveaway post, which again is linked in that blog post. Be sure to check out the giveaway post and get your entries in because it's only open through December 23rd. So you got to get the entries in before Christmas Eve. And then I'll draw the winner after Christmas, obviously, and that'll close out the year. So get those entries in for the giveaway. Oh, I didn't tell you what it was. We are giving away, and I've shown you in the last couple weeks, a project bag that says Eat, Sleep, Crochet, Repeat, a hand lotion from We Crochet, and a cute, tiny stuffed alpaca. It's about this big, and it is it's needle tufted and hand dyed, basically felted little alpaca that's stuffed. So fun presents for the end of the year, and you could get it right after Christmas. So that's what I posted this week. Now, there's obviously not going to be a Lunchtime Live next week because next Thursday, I know a lot of you will be celebrating Thanksgiving. So I'm skipping the Lunchtime Live, but I will have another post come out, which is that tutorial. And then the following week, I'm going to have a new pattern for a last minute gift for the gift extravaganza crochet along that's being done. Underground Crafter is running that one. it's been going for a while, and she's got different categories. Like there was men's gifts, women's gifts, kids gifts, stuff like that. And the last category is last minute gifts. So stuff that can be made like in a couple hours. And I'm thinking I'm going to do some kind of hair clip, but I haven't finished doing it yet because it's a last minute gift. So I have to wait till the last minute, right? No, but that one's supposed to come out in 2 weeks. So I'll have that pattern out. And then the next time I see you, the week after Thanksgiving, that Lunchtime Live will be a crochet stitch, and we'll do the crochet alpine stitch. So that's what's coming up the next couple weeks. And I think we're ready to jump right into the fisherman's rib. So what I'm going to do with this, because there's the basic stitch and then there's a lot of different considerations depending on what you're going to do with it, right? So I'm just going to show you how to do it first, and then we'll talk about cast-ons and selvages and all of that separately. So I said that, but I am going to talk about the cast-on first. This is, I did a seed stitch cast-on, which there's a link in that blog post. And the way I've done it, there's an extra stitch here, which is the slip knot that I put on the needle. This particular cast-on, you can you can drop the slip knot at the end, which is what I'm going to do. So the way this cast-on works is you cast on, basically, it's a version of the cable cast-on where you can do alternating knit and purl stitches. So this is a knit, then a purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and I wanted to end with a purl, but I wanted an even number, which is why I'm dropping this last one. And that's a cool thing you can do with this cast-on to adjust the number you can get. You know, you can drop the slip knot or not, depending on what you want. So my first stitch is going to be a selvage stitch, and I'm just going to knit it for this first row. Oh, let me move this camera slightly. There we go. That's better. Okay, so I'm going to knit the stitch for the first row. This is a setup row. Okay, now I'm going to go into ribbing for the next 6 stitches, and then I'll have another selvage stitch. So my ribbing is knit, purl, just your typical knit, purl, ribbing. So knit, purl, knit. I need this really tight. It's going to be fun to work into. Purl, knit, purl. So that's the ribbing that I'm setting up. And then I'm going to have one more selvage stitch at the end, which I'm just going to knit. And then I'm dropping this slip knot, and I can undo that knot later. I can go in and untangle it, which is what I would do, which is what I did on this swatch. But for now, I'm just going to leave it there. Okay. So now I'm going to start the actual pattern of Fisherman's Rib. If you remember from the previous, like 2 weeks ago, we did that knit B stitch where we worked the knit one below. And so working a knit one below means you go in here to knit the stitch, right? Into the stitch below it rather than into here. Okay. So that's the same technique we're going to use here. It's just a slightly different arrangement with purl stitches to make the ribbing. So for the first stitch for the selvage, I'm slipping it knitwise with my yarn at the back. Okay. Now I'm going to knit this stitch. And I'm not knitting it here, I'm knitting one below. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more here. I always get in trouble with zoom because then I end up off the camera, but there we go. Look good? Okay, so see that loop underneath the stitch? That's where I'm going into, okay? So I knit into that, and what that's doing is it's taking this stitch that I made last time and basically dropping it and turning it into a wrap. So I've knit into the stitch below and basically skipped that stitch on the previous row because I just turned that into a wrap, right? For the purls, we're just going to purl them. Okay. Now this one is another knit stitch, and you can tell it looks like a knit stitch, right? You can memorize the repeats of this, or you can read your work. And frankly, reading your work is much easier when it comes to this. So we're going to knit into the stitch below here, okay, knit one below, and then purl. Okay, knit one below, right there, and then purl. And now for my last selvage stitch, I'm just going to knit it. And like I said, we'll talk more about selvages later, but for this one, I'm just going to knit it. Okay, so that is the first row of actual fisherman's ribbon. You can see that we've started to get that ribbing pattern with knits and purls, right? Okay, next row, I want you to look at this stitch here, not the selvage stitch, the one next to it. We just did a purl there, right? So that one was not wrapped, that was just a regular purl. When we turn this around, that one looks like a knit stitch, yes? So now it's going to get wrapped on this row. So every stitch ends up getting worked twice. You're going to purl it on one side, and then you're going to knit it below on the other side for each stitch. And because you're turning, it alternates. So I knit one below, I purl one. Knit one below, purl one. Okay. So let's talk about these selvages. Because we're wrapping each stitch and knitting it, we're basically working, I'm zooming back out. We're basically working each stitch twice. We can't work well, first of all, we can't work the edge stitches in pattern because it becomes very floppy. There's just not enough to hold that dropped stitch at the edge, okay? So we have to do some kind of selvage. I typically tend to like garter stitch selvages, but that doesn't work well here because on a garter stitch selvage, you're still stitching into the stitch every time, right? You're not skipping rows. And with the rest of this ribbing, you are skipping rows, right? Because you're working into the row below. So I find that a slip stitch selvage works better on this kind of ribbing. Now the slip stitch selvage I like, which gives me this nice, ruffled edge here that looks like pearls, right? Because it's coming off a knit stitch. I like that it looks a little bit like pearls on the edge. That selvage is done by knitting the last stitch every time and slipping the first stitch with the yarn in back, okay? Because what that does is it makes this yarn kind of wrap around the stitch and then you get that pretty ropey edge. You can do any kind of slip stitch selvage you want. I just think the slip stitch selvages work better because we're doing this dropping down, okay? So we're going down into the row below, knitting this stitch, and then purl. Okay, so now let's talk about repeats. You've noticed that every one of my rows that I've done has started with a knit stitch. There's a selvage stitch and then we start with the knit one below. That's because I have an even number of stitches. So the last stitch I work before the selvage, as I get there, is a purl, right? When I turn, that stitch looks like a knit. So that's why I'm always starting with a knit, and it's a single row repeat. It's always knit one below, purl one, knit one below, purl one, right? Because now that first stitch is a knit. If I had an odd number of stitches, which you totally can do, in fact, let's do this. Let's get rid of a stitch. Let's unpick this one, and let's just make this, I'm going to knit these two together and make this my new selvage stitch, okay? So now I have started with a knit and I've ended with a knit, not counting my selvage stitches, right? So now the first row, or the row on this side, is selvage stitch and then knit, purl, knit, right? And then selvage stitch. Now when I turn, it's going to be selvage stitch, and then the first thing is purl. So it's purl, knit one below, purl, knit one below, purl. So on one side it's knit, purl, knit, and on the other side it's purl, knit, purl. And that becomes then a 2-row repeat because we have an odd number of stitches. So you can memorize that, even number of stitches always starts with a knit, odd number of stitches alternates, but you don't have to, right? Unless you're writing a pattern, you don't need to know that. What you need to know is when you see a knit stitch, you knit one below. When you see a purl stitch, you purl it. And that's it. That's as complicated as fisherman's rib gets. Well, no, I lied. That's as complicated as a simple 1-1 fisherman's knit rib gets. You can do all sorts of cool patterns with this where you make these, okay, look at these columns, right? you can do increases and decreases and stuff to make these columns travel and create patterns with it, just like you can with brioche. And when you look, fisherman's rib is actually related to brioche. It's similar to the brioche knit because with the brioche knit, you are actually slipping and wrapping the stitch and then working through the wrap on the next row. Working in the row below has a similar effect, but it's not quite exactly the same. It's just very, very close. So I want to show you. Okay, hang on, let me zoom in more. There we go. Okay, so when we look at each of these stitches, right? Look at this. Look at the pearls. Okay, look at this pearl. It's not just the purl bump. It's got a double purl bump. Do you see that? It's got a wrapped stitch around it here. There it is. Do you see? There's one and there's two. So there's the regular purl bump and then there's this wrapped yarn that goes around it. So that's what creates this super dense stitch. And the same is true of the knit stitches. It's just harder to see because there is that wrapped yarn that's going around behind the knit stitch. So like here's the knit stitch and then there's this wrapped yarn going around behind it. So that's why you get this really dense, thick fabric. It also doesn't cinch in as much. Like a regular 1-1 ribbing, if I had done this square here, the regular 1-1 ribbing would be sitting here looking like this. It cinches in a lot more, right? But because this has all that extra yarn in it, when it relaxes, it looks like this because that extra yarn kind of spreads it out. So you get a looser ribbing. It's super stretchy. I made tight cast on and bind off edges, but it's super stretchy, but it's kind of loose. It's not going to be like really super tight, but it's super warm. So that's a cool thing. As far as my cast on and bind off edges, I chose to bind off in pattern because I wanted a square that was going to stay at about 6 inches. So I wanted the bind off and cast on edges to be 6 inches and not to be super stretchy. I don't need them to be super stretchy. So my bind off edge is a, I just bound off in pattern. You knit the stitch and then you pull the previous stitch over it. But you work the stitch in pattern and then pull the previous stitch over it. And that's what I did for the bind off here. Right here, this mess that you see right here, this was when I experimented with actually not having a selvage stitch and continuing in pattern. And you can see that it gets very floppy and this actually looks much neater. So that is Knit Fisherman's Rib. That's about all I have to share about it today. I know it's a fast day today, but there's a lot going on with the holidays coming up and everything, so I haven't had a lot to share. But I will see you all in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. If you're celebrating Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. And I will see you later. Bye.